looks not tan, but relaxed. So that's a good thing. And welcome back to Julie Hatch. My goodness, it's been long. So it's great to have you back ambulatory and with us today. Let us start with our Pledge of Allegiance. Grant Monroe, may I call on you to lead our pledge?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Kelly Johnson, I think I remember you hobbling around with food on your feet several years ago too.
Well, yeah, I broke it out at Lake Ozette on the beach. It was a 12-hour rescue from the National Park Rangers. So,
That was painful getting back.
yeah, I'm an overachiever, so I did it really good.
Yeah. Sherry has a couple of thoughts.
Good morning, good morning. I always like a motivational quote. This is one of my favorite from Zig Ziglar. People often say that motivation doesn't last. Well, neither does bathing. That's why I recommend it daily. Okay, now for our candidates, thank you for running for office. There's only one way to avoid criticism. Do nothing. Say nothing. Be nothing. You guys are awesome. Thanks for running.
Andrew, do you have a motion?
Yes, I do, Mr. President. Pursuant to our bylaws, and if there's interest and questions, I move that we extend till 8:45.
Second.
I think I heard 2 seconds over here, so. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. We'll leave it 8:45, if not before. Any reports from committee chairs or officers, directors of the organization? I don't see any. Okay. Without further ado, we'll pass the microphone to Andrew and we'll get started.
Microphone, that's a joke.
Do you want one?
Ladies and gentlemen, members and guests, candidates, member of the media, good morning and welcome to another beautiful day in Port Angeles. And it is. The weather is gorgeous, and so is democracy. And today we have the second in our series of primary debates, because remember, in our system, it's representative democracy. We're busy, we're doing things, the issues are complex. So we elect a representative who we hope will represent our interests. So it's vital that we bring these candidates in front of you, listen to their ideas, their policies, answer your questions, so you can make that informed decision. With that, let's introduce the candidates first. We have the incumbent for District 24, Position 2, Steve Theringer. Welcome. We have the challenger, one of the challengers, Brian Pruitt, District 2, or Position 2. Welcome. And then again, there's another candidate. That is why we have a primary, Darren Cochran. He has been having back issues, has been unable to attend pretty much every debate. We did ask if he would want to present a statement. I believe as of this morning, we've had no reply. But once again, there is a third candidate in the race. Let's go over the rules real quickly so everybody knows. Each candidate will have 4 minutes to open. After that, if they so wish, they can have 2 more minutes to respond, follow up, etc. We then go to questions. We always go to questions from members first. It's one of the privileges of being a member. We ask that every question be structured in a manner that each candidate can answer, not a personal attack, and then we go to a 1-minute close. With that, I'm going right off how it was listed on the Clown County website. So Steve, you'll begin. 4 minutes, please.
Good morning, everybody. It's good to see you. Good to be in front of the PABA again. So a lot of you know me. I was your county commissioner from 2000 to 2012 in Clown County, and I've been your state representative since 2011. And in that time, we've done, I think, a fair amount of good work. As commissioners, and Randy, I see he's here, Randy Johnson is here, we are one of the few counties in the state that doesn't have any indebtedness. So we're, I think Randy and the board is continuing that as Mike Chapman and I did for the 12 years. And in the legislature, I've positioned myself to also be in kind of a place of fiscal responsibility. So as a lot of folks know, I chair the capital budget in the House, which is interesting because the Senate doesn't really have a chair. Their capital budget team is sort of folded into the Ways and Means Committee. So that kind of, I would like to think, elevates me a little bit as having a chair of a specific committee in the House. And I'm also on the Appropriations and the Healthcare Committee. And the interaction of those three committees has been pretty beneficial, I think, here for the peninsula. For example, been able to use the capital budget to fund dental clinics both here in Port Angeles and also in Port Townsend. And by being on the Appropriations Committee, I've been able to make sure there's operating dollars and reimbursement rates to make those clinics viable. Been able to work with the ports. In fact, they just received an award from the ports, a Compass Award for vision and unparalleled direction, which seems a little bit over the top, but it is one of the things that I work on as a capital budget chair is to make investments in our ports, both in Port Townsend, here in Port Angeles, and down in Grace Harbor. As folks know, those are real important economic drivers for the North Peninsula. And in the healthcare arena, we've been able to work to maintain access, quality access, at a reasonable cost. One of the things, again, being on the Healthcare Committee and being on the Appropriations Committee, been able to get additional dollars for both Grace Harbor Community Hospital and Olympic Medical Center so that they get a higher reimbursement rate than they normally would get had we not given those extra dollars to them in the appropriated budget. So those are some of the things, the seniority that I have, the three committees that I'm on, and how they work together to make improvements for us here on the Olympic Peninsula. The issues we are facing are, of course, very challenging right now. One of the things that I'm working on is mental health services. There's a number of, just one example, there's a number of folks, in fact, across the state, there's about 12,000 older adults that have behavioral health issues, either advanced ADD or Down syndrome or some sorts of things. And one of their challenges is the parents of these children are now getting to an age where they cannot take care of them. So we have to, as a state, find places for these folks so that because the parents as they age want to feel assured that their kids will have some place that they can be safe and secure. And so actually tomorrow, I co-chair a Joint Executive Legislative Committee on Aging and Disabilities. We're going to have a presentation on what it takes to site adult family homes for these kids with acuity and also SOLAs, which is another option. But we have a huge need in the state for finding placements for folks in the community with these behavioral health issues. So that's one of the things I've been working on in the interim this summer. So looking forward to the rest of your questions and further discussion. Thank you.
Very good, thank you, Steve. Brian, please, 4 minutes.
Good morning, welcome everybody, and thank you for coming here. I think we'll have a good time this morning. I want to talk about two things, positivity and negativity. I've got a positive message to share with you, and I want to cover some of the negativity that we've had the past 10 years. With the incumbent, we've seen a 75% increase in the cost to us in terms of budget for a 14% increase in population. I'm going to be throwing numbers out, but I'm very cognizant that our state math scores show our school has a 70% failure rate in math. So numbers may be challenging for people like me who graduated middle of the class, but we have a 50% competency rate in our state school systems for reading and writing. Those directly impact you. How many of you are going to hire a clerk that can't read and write? and makes a 70% error rate on financial transactions or fixing your car, and that sort of thing. So those are some hard numbers to consider. I've got the budget from 10 years ago, published by the state of Washington, and the one last year for 2021. We're getting messages that Washington voters are dissatisfied with Democrat-controlled Olympia ahead of November. We've got 6 bad bills introduced by Democrats that impact you and your financial resiliency, your loss prevention programs and retailers, and what we're having right here in Port Angeles. What are we having? We're having, where the community is hosting all costs for mental health care, transitional housing, that sort of thing. And some of you have been impacted by theft from homes, properties, and businesses. Those are areas that I feel we've gone in the negative area, and we don't want to do that anymore. We want to restore good policing, good community health care, and good community services. As far as business practices, we really need to focus on what are we doing to help you as business people and your families. We need to repeal the gas tax for a period of time, just like California proposed. And I've never been a California advocate, although I've stationed there 3 years in the Army, but Prop 19 has some real future value to us here. If we lock in the property tax rate at time of purchase and it doesn't change until the time of sale or transfer, that is a real benefit and a real savings to all of us who are looking at possibly being priced out of our homes. Those impact you directly as businesses as well. And I personally would never vote for a legislator who went ahead and passed an income tax, voted for it, which is against our state constitution. The court proved it's wrong. I'll leave it right there. You know, we have some real issues, and I hope you direct that to the person who passed those bills. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Brian. Steve, if you'd like 2 minutes, please.
Thanks, Andrew. So I just want to go a little deeper into healthcare and access to healthcare, because that's an important issue here on the peninsula. As you know, we've had some staffing issues both at OMC and across the state, mainly because of COVID and those impacts, but also there's this demographic of a lot of folks retiring, and what we're losing is the experienced nursing and the experienced staffing that can train and bring on younger, new employees. So what we did in the legislature this year is we increased the funding by $46 million for workforce training. We added $37 million for tuition scholarships for nurses, and then because it's hard to hold on to these nurses and these instructors because they can do so well now as travelers or other things, we beefed up by about $175 million the salaries for training for the instructors, so that we have people that can instruct the medical staff that we need so greatly. The other thing, access here on the peninsula, is we've been championing telemedicine, which is a huge deal for us on the peninsula. So instead of someone having to travel to Seattle to the University Hospital or someplace else to be able to access a neurologist or a psychiatrist, you now can do that through telemedicine. And we've worked to make sure that there's parity within that billing. So that makes it, makes it so that the physician or the person that's providing that care doesn't have to choose for that higher reimbursement rate for the person that's in the office or the person that's on the telephone. There's parity there in the reimbursement rates, so that expands and makes it stronger for them and more opportunity for them to provide telemedicine. The other thing we worked on, as you know, probably know, insulin went up to was taken over by a new company and went up to $600 a dose. We have worked in the state to drop that back down to $40 a dose. I think there's work on that at the federal level, but that's the sort of thing we need to keep doing to make sure our healthcare is affordable and accessible.
Thank you, Steve. Brian, if you'd like 2 minutes, please.
Yeah, thank you. I see that healthcare is becoming the big topic for the Democrat majority, and we're a minority. I'm conservative Republican. I'm a minority. I understand that, and I live like a minority. But healthcare isn't why we're here today. We're here to talk about how we can go to the legislature and help the business climate in our community. And one of the biggest resources we have that's not being handled correctly is our youth, our children, our schools. I spoke to a bank teller yesterday, She said the 24 core requirements killed her. I said, did you get out of high school and be able to walk in this job? She says, no. She says, I'm not able to take something that I can get a career with in high school now. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it didn't used to be that way. We used to have VOTEC, and I'm an advocate for VOTEC, and that is really critical for us right here in Port Angeles to get that curriculum changed. The incumbent voted for 8 bills that restrict what the school superintendent can do. And the curriculum locks kids into that, and now we're getting a dropout rate of 20% per year of our high school seniors across the state. That has to change. That impacts all of us, and you can make that change happen now by voting for Brian Pruitt. You can go to my website, voteforpruitt.com, and see what I stand for. I stand for us, our community, and our youth. And I want to make a change, and I will do it for you.
Very good, thank you, Brian. Now we'll go to questions. Before we go to members, the organization for every candidacy picks a question, and Brian, you'll start with this. As you know, there's been increased costs in transportation, problems with supply chain, etc. So given the effects of inflation on business and consumer costs, what can the legislation do to reduce the cost of business? What would you do to reduce the cost of business, if anything?
In 2 minutes?
No, now it's unlimited, baby.
Okay, well, I won't use all the time, but I want to say this, that there's things that are impacting us in extreme adversity, and one of those is fuel prices. Now, you may not have heard, but effective July 1st, a lot of fees skyrocketed. And a lot of upstream costs to you are being passed on from the producers and suppliers are being taxed at a higher rate now, and they pass that price right on down to the pump. And then the 2022 legislature and the Democrat majority voted in huge price fuel increases in taxes starting January 1st. And I've heard estimates varying from 60 cents to $1.60 per gallon. And I would ask you, raise your hand if you don't mind paying $100 per tank of gas. That's what I thought, me neither. I really think that we need to focus on our B&O tax and make that structured more appropriately for all our businesses. And we need to roll back the huge tax increases that were voted in this year. We had $16 billion surplus. When we talk about mental health care, we can build a new state mental health facility for $650 million, I've heard. I think we could do it cheaper. But we've got a problem in lack of audits. How many of you have a business that do not do an audit every year? Yeah, for most of us and even HOAs, it's a requirement to do an audit. Do you know that DOT, our Department of Transportation, has not had an audit in 15 years? Because the legislature won't force that to happen. So if you go down to Bremerton, you can drive across that area where they're putting a $59 million fish passage structure. Ladies and gentlemen, that money could fix our roads. Try driving south of Forks. You take your life in your hands. Highway 101 has a single lane area because the road washed away. There's concrete barriers there. That's Highway 101. That's a primary road for our peninsula. And in legislature, we can go and make effective laws and get changes, and get accountability, and get good cost savings that can get things fixed that we need to have done.
Okay, Steve, same question. What can the legislation do? What would you do, if anything, to help with the increasing prices?
So I think, one of the main causes for a lot of our challenges is COVID, right? So COVID increased, did a number of things, right? It screwed up the supply chain. It hurt our number of employees. It forced, I think, early retirement for a lot of folks. So it's just had a ripple effect through our economy. What we've tried to do in the legislature, what I've tried to do as capital budget chair, is continue to make investments that both create jobs doing that work, but also have long-term benefit for the economy moving forward. And as we talk about inflation and we talk about the cost of doing business, one of the things is the supply chain. So, for example, we put $35 million into the capital budget this year for ports across the state to help them with the supply chain issues. If any of you have been taking the ferry into Seattle, into Bainbridge, you've noticed all the containers are stacked up there near Harbor Island. part of the problem is drayage trucks that carry those containers away and put them on the rail and get them, moving across the country. There's a real shortage of those. So part of that money, that 35 million, went to that. When we talk about transportation, we were able to put together a transportation package this year without a gas tax. And part of that was an increase in your license fee. But for us out here on the peninsula, where we drive more and there's more miles, that set increase in our license was a more stable way to fund transportation than a gas tax. So we did not do a gas tax, we did do increase in license fees. What that's gonna get you is a new Elwha Bridge. It's gonna get you the intersection on the east of Squim is finally gonna have an east-west. Now as you know, you can only go east off of that interchange. We're gonna get an east way to go west off that interchange, plus you'll get a frontage road that'll provide safety there at Happy Valley and Palo Alto. Those two projects are in the transportation budget, thanks to actually Representative Chapman. As a lot of you know, we sort of divide up the workload down in Olympia, and Mike really focuses on transportation. But those two projects would not have been able to continue had we not been able to put together a transportation package that Mike worked on. So those types of things, continue to make investments to, to create economic activity when we make the investments, but also improve our economic strength. If we talk about training and CTE, career technical education, Chris Rakedahl, who's the superintendent of public education, he and I came into the legislature together, so I know Chris pretty well. And he has been a champion all along for career and technical education. And I don't know where my opponent gets the idea that I voted against that. We've actually supported that. One of the things we did through the capital budget is increase skill centers. Folks may be aware of skill centers around the state. A lot of them are 40 or 50 years old, and now we're needing to make investments to improve them. The first one we chose to put some investment in, about $40 million, is the West Sound Skill Center down in Bremerton, which a number of our students from East Jefferson and Clown go to. It's not the most practical thing because there's a transportation, an hour or two back and forth, but it does provide training for skills, particularly carpentry, computers, and also there's a very, very robust beautician school there. The other thing we did in the capital budget a couple years ago is we built a marine systems facility at the Northwest Boat Building School in Hadlock. And for anybody who's familiar with that group, they graduate about 30 folks, I think, every year and a half. And the Marine Systems is one of the best schools on the coast, certainly within Western Washington. So they learn hydraulics, marine electronics, and diesel. And a lot of those students actually are employed before they even graduate from that class.
Brian, I noticed you made a face when he was wondering why you thought that he voted against that. Would you give it a comment?
Yeah, as I pointed out, he voted for the laws that restrict the ability of superintendents to select their own curriculum and make it appropriate for your school district. You heard him say where he put the money: Port Hadlock, Bremerton, not Port Angeles. That's the bottom line. I have a report here published by the Washington Policy Center, May 2022, called Education in Washington State. It outlines some of the serious problems we have at the state legislature level, and I expect people to hold this man accountable. He just said he didn't vote for a fuel tax. He voted for two. And I told you what they were and when they go into effect. So I hope you ask him about those.
Any response, Steve?
Like I said, this transportation budget did not include a fuel tax. He might be referring to the Clean Fuel Standard, which actually is not a fuel tax, and there's a lot of discrepancy. You hear people throwing around it's going to cost 60 cents a gallon. Actually, in Oregon and California where it exists, it's about 4 cents. And if you want to look at economic development for our district, there's a company down in Grays Harbor, Renewable Energy, that they create biofuels. And until this bill was passed, they could not sell their product in the state of Washington. And so that's a state-of-the-art refining facility that creates jobs in our district that has a long upside is with this clean fuel standard, but without the clean fuel standard in Washington. So if that's what my opponent is referring to, then there's a little, I guess that's what it is, but so anyway, it's different when you're sitting in the committee and you're working the bills on the floor and you're negotiating with people face to face. You get a little better sense of what the reality is and what the issues are than if you're reading some policy paper from a libertarian think tank.
Boy, we covered a lot there, didn't we? I don't know if he's talking about the ghost bills that he votes for that have a title and no substance to them, or just what here, but he's muddling the over-regulation of production of biofuels with the taxes that he's passed. And the cap and trade tax has already gone into effect. I was going to say, you're going to see higher prices, and right now we're still paying over 100% increase in fuel from a year and a half ago. And ladies and gentlemen, everything in this room was delivered by truck or vehicle, including our bodies.
For the next question, any comment on muddling? All right, next question. Two-parter probably, from Guy.
My question is about public safety. I've heard from prosecutors and judges that there are certain guidelines that came down from the legislature that make it hard to incarcerate criminals the first or second time they're caught. Sometimes it can be half a dozen times or more. I also understand that so-called police reform bills were passed last year that make it harder to apprehend criminals, pursuit laws and the like. I'd like to hear the candidates' views on how well those laws are working out and which ones, if any, they would change if elected.
Steve, we'll start with you. I think you heard the question.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Kai, and I think all of us, need to be safe in our communities, and not only need to be safe, but perceive we're safe. And that 2 years ago, the first year of the biennium, we passed, I think, 3 bills of major public safety reform. And then, and they had to do with, and then the other thing that was sort of thrown into that mix was the Supreme Court during the middle of the session made the Blake decision, which you may be familiar with, that basically outlawed possession. They said that possession is now no longer a crime. Possession of drugs is no longer a crime. And so we dealt with those last year, or 2 years ago, and then this year we had to tweak them a little bit. And I noticed that Brian Smith is here, and worked with him, talked with him, and we made adjustments from the first year to the second year on a number of things. One of them was involuntary hold, and the issue. I mean, I don't think we want our law enforcement having to have a lawyer with them every time they encounter somebody. The laws need to be very clear for them, because as we know, they're making decisions in a very, split second. They can't be thinking about, what are the legal ramifications of that. So I will say these reforms have cut the number of homicides by law enforcement by 40% over the last 2 years. And the issue around Terry stops, which I think is the big one in pursuit right now, is I think one we still need to address. So in other words, someone stopped, there's no way if you stop them you can't stop them for a taillight and then they can just drive away, right? So the idea is that they are then not respecting our law officers, and so I think this is the one, the pursuit piece is the one piece we still need to work on, and we'll adjust. I will say the other issue around the Blake decision, which, as I said, decriminalized possession, what that's taken away from our prosecutors and law enforcement is a hammer that would get offenders into drug court and into therapy courts. And when I was commissioner, I made it a point to stop by those drug court graduations the 12 years I was a commissioner. And it was really impressive to see the progression of how effective those therapy, that drug court was, and how it sort of percolated out into the community, and more folks were starting to get, on the right path, if you will. So right now, under the way the current law interprets the Blake decision, prosecutors and law enforcement do not have that hammer to drive offenders or drug users into those therapeutic courts. And so I think we're going to have to do continual work on that this session to improve that. So I think that when we talk about being safe in our communities, I think we have to, in our community, we're safe on either side of that blue line, if you will. In some communities across the state, that's not the case. And so when we talk about being safe and feeling secure in your community, we have to look at the full spectrum of public safety. We're lucky to have, Brian and Sheriff Bennett and some really strong law enforcement here on the peninsula. And in dialogue with them, I think we'll continue to hopefully get these things dialed in so they're both effective, keeping us safe, but also lead to good treatment and ultimately, diminishing the amount of crime that it's happening. I will say, nationally, crime is a huge issue, and to just point to the reforms that we've had in Washington as being the cause, I think is not the whole story.
Brian, public safety, how about police reform? What should legislation continue to do?
I really appreciate this question because so much has happened, and the laws that were passed, there's 6 of them that the incumbent voted for and passed in 2021 that broke our police in manners that enhance crime. The Washington State Police Patrol have published the fact that they've had over 950 drive-aways. That's where they stop somebody and the driver stomps on the gas and goes racing off, and we had incidents where one of our prized citizens from Port Angeles went down to Silverdale, was selling drugs with his girlfriend in the car, got surrounded by police, and he told the girl, duck, and he proceeded to just ram his way out and run the car down the road until it ran into a tree 3 miles away. Ladies and gentlemen, the incumbent voted for these laws, and they are HB 1310, HB 1054, HB 1267, Senate Bill 5051, Senate Bill 5066, Senate Bill 5263. And now we're trying to mount an initiative system just to fix what he voted into law that impacts us so much. We've got an initiative, I-1474, that will restore police pursuit. That's critical. The sheriff sat here a couple months ago and explained to us in the 60 or 70 pursuits that our trained law enforcement people had, they never ever had any untoward incidents except apprehending the criminal. That's important information. You don't send a police officer to an academy for training in all aspects of law enforcement, apprehending criminals, and say, well, you're not safe now to have law enforcement and conduct that in our community. That's just idiotic. And we've got idiotic laws getting passed. We need to get them changed. We talked about, we've had, I'm a big supporter of family court, mental health court, and drug court. Those are 3 big changes our society needs to have. When you hear how fentanyl right here is 50 cents a tablet, that means you can get high for a week for the price of a Starbucks coffee. We've had pounds of drugs seized in this community, and it's all because we can't pursue the felons. We can't even interrogate a minor. We go down to CVS or Safeway, a minor grabs a bottle of booze and runs through the door. The people can't apprehend that minor, and the police right now can't interrogate that person and find out what's going on. They didn't see it, they're gone. And I have parents over at Swim talking to me about how their kids are getting drunk in the parking lots during school because they know where to go steal booze, they know they can't be apprehended under the state laws that got changed, and that is not making for a safe situation, ladies and gentlemen.
Anything to add before we move on? All right, next question.
Just a follow-up on that. For House Bill 1054 constrains the police right to pursue. So if someone steals the car and is speeding away, they can go after them, but they no longer have to pull over, which has caused an increase in stolen cars and other things. Can we address House Bill 1054 and the constraint police pull people over? That's something new to our community.
Yeah, we had a bill last year, it came out of the Senate, that was closed. I mean, it came out of both chambers. It didn't quite make it through conference committee to address that, and we're going to need to address that. I will say that pursuits tend to lead to a high number of deaths, high-speed pursuits. But I think what we're talking about here is just a normal pursuit. And again, I think we need to let the law enforcement have discretion to be able to make that choice. They're not gonna go, hopefully, on a high-speed chase through Port Angeles, right, for kind of, if you will, de minimis return with a high risk. But if that person that's, they stop and sort of tears off into the parking lot, then I think, we need to give back to them more discretion. Right now, I think the laws are a little too, like I said, they should not have to have an attorney with them when they're making those split-second decisions. So, we were close to addressing that. I think we need a little more work on that. And this is a big issue, right? And as we put this into context back 2 years ago, after George Floyd and after what had happened nationally, and then the pendulum swung quite a ways, and then last year we came back and we adjusted it, and so I think we still have more adjustment to find that right balance. And there's a lot of dialogue going on with law enforcement and the legislature, and so we need to get it right, and I think we will. As we've made some changes this year, we will make some changes next year.
Right, 1054.
Well, I already stated it, and you already heard it. It wasn't broke, and the incumbent was one of the votes that broke it. I don't know what else I can say beyond that. We were doing a good job. Like the sheriff told you the success rate we've had, 60 to 70 apprehensions with chases. And my own son-in-law was involved in some of those chases right here at 2 and 3 in the morning. He never hurt anybody. And he caught the criminals, except for the guy that pursued at 110 miles an hour, headed for Forks, and went off and hit the tree 3 miles down the road and laid there all night before somebody found him. That's the level of criminal activity you have from time to time. Ask Chief Smith what our level of criminal activity is here. And you heard the Chief Criminal Deputy, Brian King here. He described what's going on right here in Port Angeles. It's not good. And we need to be able to catch the people who are committing violent acts, catch the people who are causing harm and endangering our community, and hold them.
Next question from our treasurer.
The question or the comment was made that one of the major problems was COVID. I would like to know why and what you would propose to do, Brian, to reverse the governor's emergency powers. These powers were put in place in 1990, long before COVID. But COVID caused our employment problems. People did retire because they didn't want to take that vaccine. Young people won't go into the healthcare industry because they know they're going to be forced to take that vaccine. What would you do to change what's going on regarding COVID and employees?
Well, you covered several topics here, and I'll address each of them. First, I would work to try and reinstate the people who were fired in October that were maintaining our ferry boats, working on our roads, and that sort of thing. Those people are important. They are trained professionals, and they were fired. They were fired because the governor has unlimited emergency powers. And the incumbent had an opportunity to vote those down. That's one of the things we asked the legislature to do, was stop the endless emergencies. What is it, 900 days now with this emergency? And if you know what really is going on, there's other emergencies that have been going on for years with the governor's emergency powers. And with that, he can spend whatever money he wants to. And the fallout from that has been people like the insurance guy, Mike Kreidler. If you're aware of what he's doing, he declared he has his own emergency powers. Labor and Industry said, well, we have our own emergency powers. It's all cascading from one simple vote, the vote that did not end the emergency powers of the governor. And there were multiple bills tried to push through committee. They were all killed by the Democrat majority. So I'm working hard to become the majority party myself. We want to get common sense back in. We want to address some of the wrongs that have occurred in the last 3.5 years. I feel very strongly about that. And I know we can make a difference. You asked about you didn't mention the rainy day fund. You know what they did to our rainy day fund? We don't really have one now. What the Democrat majority did is they are diverting the COVID emergency money into a shadow account where they can expend those funds without having the 2/3 required emergency power, the emergency spending capability needs 2/3 of the legislature to be able to spend rainy day funds. So now they're diverting all the money that's supposed to go to that into their shadow fund. That's impacting us as well. And I've gone on record 2 years ago, I said there is absolutely no justification for leaving our big box stores open and closing our small businesses.
Okay, and along with Brian introducing the rainy day fund, the question dealt with COVID, major problems, and especially the emergency powers of the governor.
So 1 million people died from COVID in the country. Data shows that maybe 400 to 650,000 of them would still be alive had we not politicized vaccines. So if you want to talk about the families and the people that were impacted by COVID just directly through death and sickness, then I think you need to look at the politicization of vaccines and what that did. Now, we were talking a lot about law and justice and about how not wanting to have an attorney next to law enforcement when they're making those split decisions. When we're making, in a crisis, when you're making decisions, you don't want to politicize those decisions. You want an executive to be able to make those decisions, just like you do in your own business, just like you do in your own life. You don't open them up to, a legislative process. And I'll tell you, the legislative process is it's messy. And it takes time. And the politics around these issues are diverse and complicated. So during a crisis, you need, an executive that's making that decision. And the impact of COVID on a number of people's lives, as I said, probably 450,000, 600,000 people died that didn't have to because vaccines were politicized. On the rainy day fund, we still have a rainy day fund. It's triggered by what can be spent out of the rainy day fund. It's linked to unemployment. So there was high unemployment during the COVID, so we moved some of the money out of the rainy day fund into another fund. But the budget stabilization fund right now is getting reimbursed. It still exists. My opponent just is naive about some of these things. And so there's actually 3 funds. There's a budget stabilization fund. There is the fund that was transferred. And then there's the basically operating budget that has revenue coming into it. Our revenues picture at the state level is pretty strong because the sales tax has been robust. And so we are actually, we do our budgeting on a 4-year cycle, 2 years for the biennium and then a projection for the next 2 years. And we're expected on the 4-year projections to have about $12 billion in reserves, which is more than enough than we need for, we average around 10% or so to maintain our budget stability. So we're actually in pretty good shape financially, and there does exist a budget stabilization fund that is getting revenue put into it right now, contrary to what my opponent thinks.
Brian, are you just naive on these things?
Yes, I'm absolutely naive. I'm as naive as the person you leave in charge of your business, and I'm not that guy. I'm the one that says, I hired a guy to represent me and collect money and work. So why'd you give it all away? Well, because I gave it away because we had so many more new taxes passed on us. And the bragging about all the big programs, that's your money. That's your money, your money, your money, your money. That's my money. And here's somebody bragging about how much more robust the income is. That's our money that he's taking from us. We have to have a reasonable level of safety, public infrastructure, and sustainment of government services, but not run amok. Not when you get a $15 billion surplus projected and spend it all. And then to talk about, I'm naive. I'm naive because I expect we have a rainy day fund, and he just described 3 different funds to you. That's what I was describing. So I'm naive. Thank you.
And if you run amok?
No, so we've talked a lot about transportation, right, and the need for transportation, how that helps supply chain, how that, on the peninsula, how important that is. The revenue that came out of this, we had because of the American Recovery Act, because of the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, and because of a robust revenue, we had $10 million that in the operating budget. $2 billion of that went to transportation. $2 billion of that went to the capital budget that we used on housing and behavioral health facilities across the state. And then the rest went into the operating budget. And it went into accounts that needed one-time money. They didn't go into an ongoing, operating cost that would be used, would have an ongoing bow effect, right? So, because everyone knew that we're writing the budget, this was one-time money. So we invested in infrastructure, transportation, capital budget, things like that were needs. And I mentioned the need across the state for behavioral health facilities and dental clinics. That's the type of thing we're investing. Housing is a challenge wherever you are in the state. Finding affordable housing, workforce housing, and so we're making investments in the capital budget in a number of areas. One is rapid response, where you go out and purchase properties that you can convert in 3 months instead of having to build a new facility that takes 3 years. We have an account that's in the Commerce called CHIP, which is Community Housing Infrastructure, that puts in sewer and water. A lot of the housing funds just build units. They don't build the sewer and water necessary to develop those units. So we've been able to spend money on that. Actually, Port Townsend's taking advantage of that. They're getting $2 million to develop about, I think, a 10-acre parcel that will put in about 40 to 60 units. So we're using that money, this one-time money, both recovery money and IIJA money and the robust revenue money, into capital investments to meet some of the needs that we have as a state. And I think hopefully all of us agree that housing is a huge issue across the state.
Something to add?
Yes, I do. I love how somebody tells you how well they're cutting the red tape that they put into place in the first place. The Build Green initiatives, taking all the money. Well, now we've developed a rapid response plan to resolve the problems we created with our laws. You should feel grateful, and it's costing you more money.
Mr. President.
We have a little short of a half hour left. So I'm gonna do my usual long wind-up leading to a question. And I don't mind if we spend the next 20 minutes on housing, but let me define it differently. I'm gonna define the question as to median income, median household income housing. In other words, housing that is developed by the private market. No government dollars, no infrastructure spending, that kind of thing. Just private sector dollars that build spec houses. Somebody moves here from Seattle or California and contracts with a builder. That's not the kind of housing I'm talking about. I'm talking about just housing that's built for the market. Here's the twist. What would you suggest this organization support? What kind of policies and so on and so forth, legislation perhaps, that this organization support that would help the legislature remove barriers to private capital going into housing stock? Because that's really, the government dollars, Steve, that you described for affordable housing is one aspect. That's not my question. What about the private market for the median household income family or individual? What should we support?
And Steve, we'll start with you. And again, as a business association, we certainly understand that housing impacts our employees, their ability to move here, et cetera. So to the private sector, what would the legislation do to help out?
Yes, and it's a great question, Jim, and I just want to clarify that those housing dollars I'm speaking of are also as that middle band, that lost middle, or I think it covers that full spectrum of low income affordable housing to middle band, lost middle housing. Certainly the projects that I'm aware of has that mix. I think one of the keys, I think, and we talked about infrastructure, sewer and water, and that is more affordable when you have higher density. And so I think looking at, increasing the density, my understanding over the last few years, builders on the peninsula have chosen, and the market has driven, custom homes. Because there's been, there's a pretty good return on that.
That's profitable.
And there hasn't been a return on a fourplex or a sixplex or a duplex. And so incentivizing that, and that's why I think this CHIP program, which is, infrastructure, that gets the sewer and water to a parcel, and then the builder can come in and build, but I think it's gonna have to be higher density. I think we're gonna have to look at, and Port Angeles is doing that, Squim is looking at that right now, Port Townsend's doing that. I'm not sure what's going on down in the harbor, but it's sort of density by design, if you will. I don't think it has to be intrusive or people to feel that it's, changing their neighborhood. But we need, because of just a number of those infrastructure, whether it's transportation, buses, or sewer, water, broadband, all those things become more economical when you have a higher density instead of spreading it out all over. So working with, as a local organization, and there's realtors here, and there's people that are aware, highlighting where those properties are. When I was commissioner, trying to do a buildable lands inventory, and it's very challenging because a lot of that information is sort of proprietary, right? Folks are, if they've got a property, they're not gonna, they're not gonna just broadcast it all over, right? There might be some sort of, special arrangement or deal they're trying to work, right? But having an inventory of where those properties are, and if the zoning is a problem, working with your local, commissioners or councils to try and increase that density so that it then becomes more economical to find, to promote housing.
Brian.
Yeah, I've got 4 things really to talk about that. Some people get tired of hearing about the Growth Management Act and density, and some of the priorities for state funding now are for congestion relief from transportation. Well, congestion relief refers most specifically to the I-5 corridor, Seattle, Tacoma, and the Growth Management Act spin-off down to us at the county level has resulted in some counties saying you can't build more than 1 house on 5 acres. Well, really, we had the argument, discussions over accessory dwelling units and what's appropriate, what's reasonable, and you look at septic problems, well water, but there is a lot of opportunity for good housing to be built, but that falls down from the GMA down to the county codes. Port Angeles has got a clue. They're starting to revise what they're doing for getting more density in the town. But I want to address 3 other things that are foundational to getting housing. First is we need to reduce the cost of transportation, getting materials here. And we need to reduce the cost for getting workmen here. We need to look at how we're going to get our own labor force trained. And one of those falls back to the state school superintendent and what level we're going to get people into new careers. I know I've seen it happen where we have high school programs that kids can get into and not take a CTE class to introduce you to something, but actually get a qualification, getting a certificate, getting a CDL for a multitude of different careers. And we can develop our own workforce right here through apprenticeship programs, something more reasonable than getting 30 people at Port Hadlock. We need to get a stronger workforce here, and we can do this. The other thing we need to look at is this issue of public works. If you weren't tracking things, you didn't hear about how the public works funds were rerouted. And the city manager here says, well, now I need to find a new source of funds for maintaining that critical infrastructure, roads, sewers, power lines, broadband, the whole bit. And we are not getting our fair share here. You heard, if you were here, you'll listen to Marty Brewer, the school district superintendent. He explains one of the discrepancies we have with the school funding is that teachers 10 miles away, 15 miles away, 25 miles away are getting an incrementally much higher pay rate scale than our teachers and school staff are here. That means loss of income, that means loss of money available to buy housing and get people to live here and get housing built for things like nurses, doctors. You know, we need to go back and talk about what's going on with OMC too, because the hospitals nationwide have been impacted by the COVID crisis, by overwork. My own sister just quit. She retired because she just overworked. She worked at a healthcare facility that took care of terminally ill children, has done that for 12 years. She was the floor nurse there. So in my own family, I've seen this happen. But what the impacts here is that the senior nurses have had it because they are subjected to a lot of the COVID shutdowns. If you remember what happened in Seattle in 2020, 4,000 nurses were laid off and they shut down all of the clinics there in Seattle. A lot of them said, I've had it, they move on, they're retired. And that is the forced labor pool that we need to have for getting nurse trainers. Usually there's multiple certifications, usually they have 25 to 30 years service, and those people were forced out of the system because of this governor's shutdown policies. They're gone, they're not coming back. So we, Republicans, joined the bipartisan effort to get funding to fix what the Democrat majority broke when the governor shut down the programs and made the people retire and leave. Now we can't even find the people that can come in and get these funds to go to school, to get certified to be nurse instructors. We can't find the people. So you're throwing money at a problem that can't be fixed and won't be for 5 to 10 years. That's the impact of keeping the governor in power with his emergency powers. We can't fix it. They broke it.
So if I heard you right then, what our organization should do is develop a policy paper to repeal the Growth Management Act and to remove governor's emergency powers. The question was, what should our organization do?
Yeah. The Growth Management Act, I think, needs to be amended, if not revamped, and we haven't implemented in the concepts and practices we have with modern building materials, source location. You know, when GMA was passed, we did a lot of construction with actual wood. Now construction has a lot of wood fiber products. That involves a high level of industrial capability and a lot of resources for the community, more power, more water, more labor force. And we don't have that here.
Anything to add, Steve?
No, I guess not, but I think it's a little bit of a stretch to accuse the governor of the nursing shortage. I mean, if you talk to nurses at the hospital, some of them were salaried and left, become travelers because they were making $200 an hour. And then they came back to work at OMC as travelers. So, you know, the market's driving that, right? So I think that's more of a reality than what the governor, that connection I have a little trouble with.
Anything, Brian?
Yes, what Medicaid reimbursement are you aware of that pays nurses for $200 an hour to come in and help you? You got a question back here?
All right, next question. Anybody before we go to a second? Now. Okay, go ahead.
We're going back to the affordable housing. Monetary policy is driving this whole issue. The fact that we keep, maybe not in this state, we don't have debt, as you said, but we have national debt. If someone with a median income of $51,000, the way we used to do it in banking is that your payment could not be more than 25% of your gross income. And your total indebtedness could not be more than 33% of your income. So if someone with $51,000 worth of income divided by 12, that's $4,250 a month gross income. And that may be a two-family income because mom has to go out and work to have that income. That means their payment at 25% can be no more than $1,062.50. Now, you back out that, your property taxes, you back out mortgage insurance, because if you're going with an FHA loan you're gonna pay mortgage insurance upfront of probably about $3,000. And then they're gonna tack on a monthly premium of $120 a month for 11 years. That's a total of $17,000 that family has to pay for mortgage insurance. It's ridiculous. Who can buy a house in today's market for $1,062 a month payments and take out probably $200 a month for insurance and taxes and PMI? What are you gonna do to correct the monetary policies that are in place that can actually help us, the private sector, get these people affordable housing?
There we go, Brian, you get to be the mini Fed. What are you gonna do for monetary policy? To help housing at medium
Well,
range?
I think it's predicated, when you said it was national policy, national debt. Yes, and what can we do about that? The basic thing we can do is increase the living capability of the people coming up into the market now. The young people, I've addressed that several times here. You know, we're talking about the future. What are they gonna do? So, and how do they what are they gonna buy? You know, if you've been driving up and down Highway 101 here, you see a lot of RV places. And they are not the prime ones. If you go further out in our 24th district, you see a lot worse situations like Quilcene, Brennan, out there in Jefferson County, West Jefferson County. So the question is, what are we gonna do? I really don't have an answer right now for you on how to fix that, given those limitations you have. I know what we can do to change things, but I don't have a way to get more money for people. You know, if you wanna look at how that would be funded, what's happening now? We went from $7 trillion nationally to $33 trillion debt, federal government-wise. Is that funny money? Yeah, it's funny in that it's escalating the cost of everything through inflation, and then we have the taxation coupled with that, cause it higher. So we really need to work hard on reducing state costs, reducing the cost for housing, reducing the over-regulation and delays. Because when a person buys a property now, let's go back to our president's proposition here, what do we do for that middle layer? How do we get apartment buildings built? Well, if it's a 2 to 5 year timeline from the day you purchase property to occupancy, that's a huge loss in residency time that people could be occupying the building, and it's a huge increased cost as escalation, hyperinflation now. I mentioned before, when we used to have a $25 sheet of plywood 10 years ago, now it costs $66 to $88 for one sheet of plywood. That's not 4%, that's not 8%, that's not 12% inflation, that's hundreds, and that's what we have now. All cost of building supplies have increased, and you know, one thing that people don't pay attention to, intermodal transport was talked about. That's how you get the containers from the port to the warehouses for distribution. And when they changed this thing called diesel exhaust fluid, DEF, and all the trucks in the Los Angeles port were required to be no older than 10 years old, you had to buy a new truck that used DEF, and that's how you could actually access the port under their laws and get it to the warehouses so it could be shipped up to Costco, Aldrich Lumber, et cetera, and we don't have that now. And the drivers, you know, when we had the vaccine thing hit and said you can't come in the port unless you had your certificate, they said fine, stay home. And so we can't get materials, and we got over-regulation, those are big ones right now, and the hyperinflation, you know, if you haven't built it now, it's gonna be a lot grimmer in the future. And I hate to see more and more people living in tents and RVs that leak water and have all the other issues going with them.
Same question to you, Steve. You get to be the mini Fed. What can the legislation do?
Just maybe to clarify, the state does have debt. It's about, I think the treasurer writes us letters to make sure that we stay around, no greater than 10%, and there's constitutional limits. So if somehow gave you the impression that there wasn't any indebtedness at the state, that's not true. And it is sort of a Fed question. It's a money supply question, and I don't think you're wrong that some of the Fed policies they could have adjusted sooner. I think the inflationary issues were I think folks thought were really strictly COVID and supply chain issues that would be readjusted, but it's obviously more than that. And looks like the Fed's going to probably raise the rate another 75 basis points within the week or something. And so, but that doesn't put more money in your pocket. That makes well, it makes credit cards and a lot of things more expensive, which is the whole idea, right? Just to chill the economy, slow it down a little bit. The housing issue, we've talked a fair amount about it. It's a supply and demand issue right now. As you know, back in 2009, when the credit default swaps and people were buying houses and flipping houses at I don't know, zero down, right? And so that got pretty crazy, and the impacts of that were a major recession. So as a banker, you realize the importance of having those parameters. And I think probably the best solution is, again, supply and demand, creating more housing, more affordable housing for all tiers of folks looking for housing. And I'll say, so when I developed the capital budget, work on the capital budget as chair, it's a very bipartisan group. We start out day one with my ranking member, Republican from Chelan, and his assistant from Chehalis, and we work through on these issues, and their communities are as impacted by housing as our community is. And so a number of these programs that I've talked about, the CHIP program and this rapid response, we developed together. So trying to figure out ways that we as a state can make investments in infrastructure that make it possible for the private sector to build more housing is, I think, what we're trying to do, because we don't certainly have enough money at the state level to build all the houses that are needed. We need to be strategic about our investments to increase that supply.
All right. Let's see, we could go to a lightning round. Go ahead.
So we've talked a lot about affordable housing and building and all that kind of stuff, but I think one of the unintentional consequences of some of the COVID regulations for rental properties where you couldn't increase rent and you couldn't evict people and all that. I know I had a plethora of landlords that put their houses on the market and said forget it as soon as they could, or turn them into vacation rentals because it's easier. So what can you guys do to kind of turn that tide to encourage to have more long-term rentals, because we just don't now, and that's one of the reasons.
This will be a 1-minute response, Steve.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. We had a lot of input, and from this group, I've gotten input about the impact on the mom and pop, landlord, if you will, and they were pressured. There's no question. I think they needed that revenue to keep that property viable, and it got too crazy. So the market's very volatile. It's very hard to adjust that. People are aware of that. I think that finding that balance is important, because we don't want folks put out on the street, right? Increasing our homelessness problem, and it's just housing is just a very complicated, very difficult issue. On the rental housing, I think Port Angeles, Port Townsend, they've limited it, to 30 days. You got to rent for at least 30 days. So I think that's one of the issues, is finding that balance between what is a good vacational property, or what should we be doing so that we have housing for nurses and teachers.
Same question, Brian, a minute. What can we do, if anything, about?
Yeah, I do not advocate the state taking your money and building housing with it. I advocate that for the private industry. I personally, my own one-man company, we started divesting ourselves of all our rentals in Bremerton, Kitsap County about 6 years ago, when it was clear that legislature was pushing things to take rights away from landlords. So we reduced our exposure to one rental personally during the COVID crisis. But one thing we need to do is we need to look very hard at the costs that have been added on. That's the green building codes. We have a lot of opportunity for housing in a lot of areas across the state. And if you ban things like natural gas for heating, that amplifies the cost of construction and the cost to maintain those units exponentially. And so we need to stop thinking of natural gas as being the enemy and being an aid to cooking and heating of homes. And we need to look again at repealing those laws that were passed that require certain building products for Build Green. We have plenty of good ecologically sound housing developed without those laws, and the costs were substantially less. Permitting time was substantially less.
All right, before we go to close, as always, no matter how you're gonna vote, I think it takes tremendous courage to stand up, run for office, go around your district, and take the Grand Inquisition. So please, let's thank both candidates. With that said, Steve, please, a minute to close.
Well, been a good discussion. We've covered a lot of topics. I want to just get back to this. We did provide funding for landlord assistance within the budget, in both biennial budget and the supplemental budget, to help some of those folks. I think there's still challenges there. If a vote for me gets you a vote for experience, as I mentioned, I've positioned myself, I think, pretty well to be effective for us here on the peninsula, being chair of the capital budget, being on the appropriations committee, and being on the healthcare and wellness committee. 3 committees that are important, that interact well together and make a big difference for us here on the peninsula. So looking forward to further discussion through the campaign, but I hope you got a sense today that a vote for experience and a vote for knowledge about how the system works is a smart vote and will actually serve you well for the next 2 years. So I really appreciate your vote, and thanks for coming today.
Thank you, Steve. Brian.
Thank you all for being here. I've made my points very clear, I hope. And if you feel that it's in your best interest to vote again to re-elect the person who's increased your taxes, made streets less safe, increased our drug problems, and all those other wonderful benefits of living in Port Angeles, I urge you to vote for the incumbent. But if you want sound resource management, you want an improved future, if you want restoration of our rights and safety for our communities and the ability to have a good community, then I ask you to vote for Brian Pruitt. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, and Mr. President, I turn it over to you with 1 minute to spare.
Mike, thank you, gentlemen, both. I suspect that we'll have you for an encore toward the fall.
Absolutely.
September, October, so make plans accordingly. Thank you very much for being here this morning and for your good questions. Next week, we'll have the 4 candidates for the department, or the Director of Community Development for the county, with us to explain further things about the county's housing and so on and so forth, all the things that are appropriate for DCD. Thank you all. Have a good morning.
All right.
Yeah, I think we should have run. If I start out, then I close.
I know.
Thank you.
Good to see you. About the same as last time.